You're now live, Counselor.
Terrific. At 5:02, we will call to order the, what is today, March 21st, meeting of the Finance Committee. And if we could get a roll call vote, please.
Counselor Romero Worth,
Here.
Counselor Cassett,
Here.
Counselor Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Rivera,
Here.
Counselor Villarreal,
Present.
All right, I think we have a quorum, correct?
yes, you have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. We need to go to approval of the agenda, but I need to make a change in our presentation schedule. We are going to hear the economic update by Dr. Riley White first, and then the audit status update second. And I have those two changes. Are there any others, Alexis?
No other changes, Madam Chair.
All right, if it's okay with the committee, if we could get a motion to approve the agenda with the changes that I mentioned.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda with the change in the order of the presentations. If we could get a roll call, please.
Counselor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Motion has been approved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there items the committee would like to hear this evening? Councilwoman Cassett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like items A and, sorry, E, if you please.
Okay, other members of the committee? Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like item I, item M as in Mary, and item N as in Nancy.
I, M, and N. Anybody else? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Also item N as in Nancy.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. With those items pulled, do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second,
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. Can we get a roll call?
Counselor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett,
yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Motion has been approved, Madam Chair.
Terrific. Now on to approval of the minutes from February 28th Finance Committee meeting. Are there changes from staff or changes from the committee on the 28th of February minutes? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the February 28th minutes of the Finance Committee meeting. Can we get a roll call, please?
Counselor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Motion has been approved, Madam Chair.
Terrific, thank you. We do not have an executive session, so we'll move on to presentations. And as we stated at the beginning, we are going to be hearing first the economic update from Dr. Riley White. And I believe he's, oh, there you are. Terrific. Thank you for being here tonight, and I'll just turn it right over to you, unless, Mary, you have anything you wanted to add.
A few words just at the beginning. I want to thank Dr. White for joining us today with this economic update that he's about to provide. It's very insightful to understand where we're at this point in time with various different changes to our economy over the last few months, given the geopolitical events, but also continuation in some of the patterns that we've seen nationally and locally as it relates to our labor markets, as it relates to housing markets, other very important items and issues that the council regularly deals with. So really wanted to view Dr. White's presentation tonight with a lens looking forward to our FY23 budget that will be coming in front of the governing body this spring. So it's really important. Dr. White's going to be talking about gross receipts tax and the outlook for gross receipts tax and lodgers tax as well this evening. We're happy to report that January numbers came in last week. You all will be receiving your monthly update for January, where we're seeing ourselves year over year with January's we're up 1.7 million in January of 22 over January of 21. So we continue to see the positive economic growth as it relates to gross receipts tax. So with that lens ahead towards our this being some initial groundwork that we're laying ahead of our FY23 budget, I'll turn it over to Dr. White at this time.
Well, thank you so much, Director McCoy, and thank you so much, counselors. It's an honor to be here today and an honor to talk to you all a little bit about the current economic condition, especially as we and going forward, where we expect to be. Let me share my presentation right here, and I will, just 1 second. Here we go, hopefully. This will work because of my monitor size. Keeping it outside of presentation mode works a little bit better. Here's the economic outlook for today. I'll start off. This is me. I think I've met most of you before in some capacity, at least digitally. But those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor of finance at UNM. I'm also the assistant dean at UNM Anderson of teaching and learning. I'm sorry. And we have and in this capacity, I'm also the principal of Erebor LLC. To give a sense of where we are today, I'm going to kind of go overview nationally, and then I'm going to break it down into the state and then go more specifically into the city of Santa Fe. And so the most prevailing characteristic right now that we have is we're experiencing this year what I would say is moderate growth, but also inflation. It isn't stagflation. The economy is still growing. We're still recovering. But there are some interesting aspects that I want to point out. First of all, is the labor market remains very strong. We have about a 3.8% unemployment rate nationally. That's very close to what we consider full employment. Now, to be part of the unemployment rate, you have to be looking for a job as well. So it does only count people who either have jobs or are actively looking for one. During 2021, GDP growth fell very close to where we expected it to be, about 5.7%. That's a very high rate. The highest GDP growth we've seen in about 40 years. Annual inflation, however, reached about 7.9% annually. That is the highest that we've seen since January 1982 for those keeping record. So what happened is recently, of course, geopolitical actions, particularly in Russia and the Ukraine, have added further uncertainty into market conditions. Sanctions and trade policies are likely to have continued supply chain effects through 2023, and sanctions in particular, and also the trade situation in general will likely be difficult going ahead. Now, prior to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the Federal Reserve was expected to announce up to 7 rate hikes during 2022. Now, the Federal Reserve is often called the banker of bankers. They often help supply financing to the rest of the economy. And so they actually only decide one interest rate, and that's overnight lending to large banks. But this one rate has sort of a ripple effect on all the other rates that we have in the economy. So it becomes very important, and people watch it as a signal of monetary policy. So in an effort to, what the Fed will do is they will raise interest rates in an effort to help reduce economic activity and control inflation. They will lower rates to stimulate the economy. And the economy grew so fast, so quickly, that we experience incredible amounts of, for us in the last 40 years, incredible amounts of inflation. So it's likely we're going to see, especially with Chairman Powell's comments today, additional rate hikes and quantitative tightening this year. The Fed will seek to try to rein in inflation to around its 2% target level. It is unlikely at any capacity they will hit that this year. So inflation is going to be hopefully controlled, but it will be a gradual process. The continued economic uncertainty and sort of the prolonged inflationary environment will likely contribute to a series of very challenging decisions around monetary policy. All eyes are on the Fed, and you all saw the news recently of their short-term rate hike that just happened. It is likely other rate hikes are already on the horizon. The Fed has to prescribe like a doctor, the Fed is prescribing medicine to help the inflation in the economy. They don't want to prescribe too much and overshoot and reduce inflation too much that it causes an economic recession. And they also don't want to undershoot and potentially have longer lasting and more painful inflation. So it becomes a very tricky balancing act that the federal economists are doing right now. And they feel confident today they can raise rates without causing a recession, but there is uncertainty. So if we go forward into a little bit to highlight a few big picture items here, I think one characteristic about the recovery is, as you've known, and as you know, you've heard me say previously, it's been strong, but it's been very uneven. So if we go back and look at the last 2 years of economic growth in different sectors, we still are missing employees across many sectors. Leisure and hospitality, government, education, and health services in particular still have many fewer employees now than they did 2 years ago. On the other hand, some sectors have more employees than they did before. Transportation and warehousing, supply chains have responded by hiring in mass large amounts of people. Professional and business services, retail services, financial services, and information all have some slightly more people than they did back in 2020. So one aspect also to consider, and one that's important as we think about how New Mexico responds to, as we recover from inflation and as we ultimately go back into it, is the question of how private sector employment behaves relative to public sector employment. And so in this chart on the right, you see kind of the dark blue line represents private sector employment. The light blue line represents public sector employment. So in recessions, more people are laid off in the private sector, but they're also hired back faster in the private sector. In the public sector, of which New Mexico has a disproportionate number of workers relative to some states, that is much more muted. So they fire less often and they hire more slowly. And here in New Mexico, we actually ranked 50th for unemployment right now out of 50, with an unemployment rate of 5.9%. And we'll get into a little bit of that in a second. And so another thing to think about, one reason that people look to the economy and say it's a very interesting economy, it feels strong in some aspects, and it feels not quite all the way there in other aspects. One thing to consider is how these two charts from the Federal Reserve Economic Data Center show us on the left the amount of people quitting their jobs. And the reason that I'm showing you this, we're near the highest level still that we've ever seen for people quitting their jobs, about 3% in any given month of people quit their jobs. That's a lot of labor market turnover. And when people quit their jobs, that also provides agency for themselves. It's a sign of consumer confidence in the job market. But on the other hand, if we look at total openings, they're also above 11 million job openings. That's twice as high as the amount of unemployed workers. And so when you look at those two numbers, you know, there are twice as many openings per unemployed worker. Why do we still have unemployment? Because we have unemployment in sectors we don't have the right workers at the right times for the right jobs. And a lot of those questions deal into particular skills workers have, the salaries that are demanded on behalf of employers, and a lot of additional adjustments. So the job market remains very, very strong. And if we go over here, one aspect that often isn't touted enough, and I want to highlight here, is that since 2016, we've had persistently declining immigration to the United States. One aspect about lower migration is that immigrants are very responsive to economic conditions. They supply labor where it's needed the most, and often has insulated us from experiencing labor shortfalls similarly previously. If we add up the labor shortages since 2016 by immigrants, it's about 2 million workers, more or less. And so this is done primarily by backlogs in the immigration system and in a series of US policies instituted by one of the prior administrations. So as we look forward and we think about, one of the things in everyone's mind is consumer prices. Inflation is really high. We have to blow off the dust in economic and finance literature of our old resources to figure out how different municipalities behave in response to inflation, because this is the highest we've seen in 40 years. And to give you a sense of this, where is inflation happening and how do we measure it? We measure inflation from the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, What this is a representative basket of goods, of stuff that people might purchase in a given period. It's not wholly representative of what we might say purchase in Santa Fe or in New Mexico, but it is a generalized sense of a US consumer. In the last year, CPI has risen 7.9%, but it's been uneven. The chart at right is very hard to read in small font, and I don't want anybody straining their eyes beyond this. I know it's a thing. It's not an eye test, I promise. The orange categories are all energy related. So it shows you the bigger the bar chart, the bigger the effect. All above 30% changes more or less. On the other side of this, we have, of course, things like food. And it looks like, oh, well, we aren't experiencing a lot of inflation there. These are still rates at between 7 and 10%. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs a little bit higher. All of these have direct effects on consumers. Fuel is particularly nefarious as gas prices rise, of course, that increases transportation costs. The cost it costs us to move things around the country, which also can affect things like services, goods, other things people buy or enact with that might have an effect there. So there's a lot of sectors where we are seeing inflation. Energy and vehicles, of course, reported some of the highest increases. And of course, importantly, inflation is outpacing wage growth. In the last jobs report, we were hoping for a little bit better wage number. We had about a wage growth of about 0.1% that month. And we finished off at about 5.1% year on year. And that's low. So it means consumers are losing out in the long run. And I want to acknowledge food prices, particularly meats, rose at accelerated levels throughout 2021. These increases are likely to slow down, but things like labor shortages and fuel costs will likely keep them higher. So that means it hits the bottom dollar and it hits the sort of the wallet of every New Mexican. And one other thing to think about is rising energy costs. Here in New Mexico, we're the third biggest oil producer in the country after Texas and North Dakota. The United States, although we have made strides in moving to renewable energy, we still consume about 18 million barrels of oil every day across the country. And so oil is a commodity and trades globally on fundamental supply and demand constraints. You'd hope that because we produce so much here that it'd be cheaper, but it doesn't really work that way. We have to ship it to be refined, and it will be refined and sent to the markets that are the biggest, in New Mexico isn't one of them. But oil prices can be notoriously difficult to predict. We're actually really bad at this as a field. But they do rise unpredictably during geopolitical conflicts, as we saw fairly recently. It is unlikely, as we approach the summer driving season, that lower prices are likely to be on the horizon unless there's a significant drop in demand. The last time in 2008, what caused that was the 2008 recession. Commodities as well, such as nickel and wheat, also reached record highs in March of 2022. And, if we spot forecast this, and one of the things is, depending on the model that we use, and sort of my input here is to show you how worthless we can be confident at predicting oil, but we can be really off. It's so volatile. There's such a large spread that it's uncertain. I think it's likely that oil will be between $80 and $125 a barrel for most of the summer. That's a big swing, but it does, while it helps state coffers through severance taxes and other taxes on oil, it does hit consumers very harshly. Now, if we think about New Mexico, one thing to think about is we have a steady recovery, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it, but it's lagging in many ways to the rest of the country, and that has to do with the workforce dynamics we talked about earlier. The New Mexico workforce participation rate is about 56.6%. That's the amount of people who are counted as being part of the labor force looking for or currently having a job. And it remains below pre-pandemic levels. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s across the country, we saw increases in participation rates. We had boomers coming on the market, and we reached actually our maximum participation rate in the country approximately 20 years ago. And of course, we had women joining the labor force in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we reached the highest level still, over 2 decades ago. And since then, what's happened is that every recession we've had retirements, we've had people drop out of the labor force, and they drop out for some of the dropouts drop out permanently. And ultimately, one of the things here in New Mexico, we have about 26,000 fewer workers now than we did in January 2020. And this is driven by workforce retirements, as well as lagging availability of things like childcare, which puts pressure on parents, especially for young children. Since August 2021, New Mexico added about 4,000 workers in trade and transportation, another 4,000 in leisure and hospitality, 3,000 in professional and business services. Government workers, like the rest of the country, are lagging. They declined about 1,600. It's often hard for municipalities to respond to labor market conditions in the same way as other places. Unemployment, here's a map of New Mexico right now for unemployment rates. You notice that the lighter the color, the lower the rate, the darker the red color, the higher the unemployment rate. Los Alamos is very distinctive in its bright white color, having the lowest unemployment rate in New Mexico. But here in Santa Fe County, right there, we are doing fairly well. Santa Fe, as well as Bernalillo counties, have some of the better unemployment rates across the state, about 4.6%. Eastern New Mexico has some of the lowest. These are very rural counties with very high median ages, and they're very agricultural, and they've been also doing well. And there's two graphs here, and I want to point them out very quickly just to show you. This is the unemployment rate in New Mexico over time since 1980, and we're all the way there right here on the far right, and it gives you a sense, if you look at where we are today versus the last 40 years, this is a fairly good unemployment rate, like the rest of the country in New Mexico, 5.9%. We're lagging other states, but we still have some of the lowest unemployment rates we've seen. And then a silver lining, or a part of good news to talk about, is that new unemployment claims are now back to where they were in pre-pandemic levels. We saw them shoot up right in 2020, and they're back to where we were before. That is encouraging. That shows the job market is strong and responding here in New Mexico. Now, this slide probably needs no introduction. It is the real estate conditions right now across New Mexico. From the New Mexico Association of Realtors, and combined with some other price data from Zillow, always good to maximize the sources for today. Looking at New Mexico Association of Realtor data between January 2020 and January 2022, the characteristic is everything has gotten a lot more expensive. The bottom line for Santa Fe is, despite things getting more expensive, ultimately we expect, as prices go up, we expect as economic and financial theorists that what happens is more people offer their houses for sale to get those prices. And we've actually seen the opposite effect. There's actually fewer active listings in Santa Fe now than there were 2 years ago. That means that we have an incredible amount of when houses are listed, they're sold. The average days on the market are very low across the state. The state as a whole has fewer houses listed now than they did 2 years ago. And what that does is that reduces, when we have a lower supply and also a continued demand powered by high rates, that means prices are also high. Now, when the Fed raises rates over the short run, although mortgage rates don't follow what the Fed rates do, they do have a good correspondence with the 10-year bond yield, which is another bond yield determined by market conditions. We expect that rising rates or pressure on rising rates in the economy can take off some of this growth we've seen in real estate, but it won't be immediate. And Zillow forecasts the country, but not New Mexico, and they still suggest pretty robust increases in prices this year. Here in Santa Fe, of course, we dwarf both New Mexico, Albuquerque, and United States averages in the average price around the $500,000 figure, which is an incredible sum. Going down to our Santa Fe economic overview, Santa Fe unemployment dropped to 4.6%. That's good. It's significantly lower than other New Mexico counties. Not all of them, but many of them, especially in our region. However, the labor force in our local area has stabilized at around 69,500 workers or so. We have about 5,000 fewer workers in our county than we did back before the pandemic. Some of those are retirees who've left the market for good. Some of them are parents, other people who might be working temporarily, or not, who might have removed themselves temporarily from the job market to try to improve until they could achieve childcare, for instance. To give you a sense, one thing that's important to note, especially looking at Santa Fe unemployment, between 2019 and 2020, which is the most recent year for which we have complete data, the GDP in New Mexico contracted about 3.4%. During, of course, the pandemic. But in Santa Fe, in our metropolitan area, it contracted about 6%. And that's driven because we are a tourist-driven economy. We have a lot of exposure to leisure and hospitality. The nature of the pandemic was particularly harmful. But since then, the growth that we've seen has been robust, and economic activity has placed us up back to a higher level than where we were before. Construction and retail sales remain really impressively strong. One thing to note, especially as we think about any economic data, is to consider the demographics and looking at a few things. And this chart is the delightfully rainbow colored chart. On the left-hand side, this is the percentage of households in certain income brackets. The dark blue represents incomes above 200,000 and all the way down to the dark red, which is under 10,000. And as you can see, you know, Santa Fe is what makes it interesting, particular to relative communities in New Mexico, as well as the rest, as well as both neighboring counties and neighboring communities, is that we have a great disparity. And that need not be said, but we have some of the highest levels of high income people, but also significant levels of low income people as well. And this inequality is pervasive. If we look at places in Santa Fe County itself, looking at Santa Fe County, looking at the city relative to communities like Española or El Dorado at Santa Fe or La Cienega or Agua Fria, they're all kind of within the same boundaries. La Cienega has a very middle-class profile, a lot of incomes that fall in the middle. Española, much more on the lower incomes. In Santa Fe, much more on the higher incomes. Nothing that you may not already know, but it does factor into sort of our economic policy and how we look at the analysis of the data. Going back to one of the things that is a source of confidence is building permits have remained steady and consistent and also at a high level, higher than we've seen since basically before 2019. And this has been good and it continues right into 2022. So as we look towards Santa Fe specifically, we make recommendations about what's going to happen over the next year. The key is that we expect growth over the short term, but there's going to be uncertainty in the long term, particularly as the Fed raises rates. And how it raises rates becomes very important, and those monetary policy decisions become very important. However, regarding revenues for the city, gross receipts tax and lodgers tax revenues are expected to remain robust. GRT may likely reach $130 million or more this year. Spending has been robust across the economy, and that has been significant. Now, with economic recovery continuing, but also slowing, GRT is interestingly bolstered by higher prices in goods. So high inflation in commodity prices, on the other hand, offset some of these gains by making potentially higher municipal expenses. So everything from the construction equipment to the goods to the fuel often have to be allotted for in very specific ways. So expect rising rates and slowing economic growth as the Federal Reserve steps in to control inflation. They have a $9 trillion balance sheet, a lot of which they hold a lot of bonds and mortgage-backed securities and other bonds. And they're going to unwind some of those as well, most likely. Although the effect, when we study this, the effects of unwinding, say, the Fed selling the stuff that it bought to help support the market isn't as big as rate increases, it is still significant. Global geopolitical unrest is going to continue with supply chain issues, and that affects firms here in Santa Fe. Expect uneven sector-based inflation to continue and hopefully gradually improve. High energy costs are going to create additional challenges for residents and firms. In New Mexico, we drive more than the average American, and given the rural character of our state, there is a high preponderance, a high percentage of our incomes go to gas prices. The labor market is strong, but finding qualified workers continues to be challenging, especially in customer service focused industries. And there's not really a light at the end of this tunnel right now for this, but it will be a gradual adjustment as firms and employees alike get used to sort of the different labor market conditions. So overall, that presents the context of my update, and I want to open it to any questions that you all might have. I'm happy to answer anything that's on your minds.
Thank you, Dr. White. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be helpful. We can always go back if we need to.
Yes, of course.
It's just helpful to be able to see the whole board. And if we're not needing to look at a particular graph, it's easier to take it down. Questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. White, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for being here tonight. I just had I guess a question on when the data was pulled, because the Santa Fe New Mexican, I believe is a New Mexican, recently reported that the median price of a home in Santa Fe was around $600,000. So just curious about that.
Thank you so much, Councilor Rivera. On this, so the most recent data, and I like to use, we can grab The data for real estate is very choppy. We can examine because, for instance, an individual house sale that was very, very expensive can throw off some of our averages. But our medians, to your point, the data was pulled from the most recent New Mexico Association of Realtors report, which was good for January of 2022. And that's where those numbers come from. In addition, the Zillow numbers are refreshed and they incorporate city and some county information. And so there's some overlap with what you find in the Santa Fe New Mexican, and the data is consistent, but specifics and the houses that they include may be different. So what appears on Zillow is not necessarily thorough, and things that might be most authoritative, like the New Mexico Association of Realtors. What's interesting about that data is it provides greater insight into things like the amount of days an average house is offered for sale, the inventory, and a whole slew of additional data. And they produce this information monthly. So we'll have a February update fairly shortly that will provide additional data. But consistently, there is a match within our data if we look at regardless of whether we look at Zillow, New Mexico Association of Realtors, or the source specifically from the Santa Fe New Mexican, we're looking at increases here in Santa Fe that have met or often exceeded national averages. That's consistent in many cities across the West uniquely. So that's something that we're seeing very consistently.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. White.
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Anybody else from the committee with a question? I don't see anybody. Dr. White, thank you very much for coming. You cover quite a bit in a very short period of time at quite the clip. So thank you. Thank you for being here and giving us that overview. It's very helpful to kind of understand where we are, and particularly as we move into April, where we will be considering the budget for next fiscal year. Councillor Cassett, you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just hoping that we could have that PowerPoint sent over to us. I don't see it on PrimeGov right now. That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Councillor Cassett. Thank you, Councillor Romero Worth as well. I will send over, the PowerPoint I sent it over to Director McCoy, and it's free to access at any time. And if I could be supportive with any additional information, never hesitate to reach out. And it's so much, I get so excited, I just talk too quickly, but I'm so appreciative of your time.
No, I wasn't being critical. You cover a lot of ground and give us a very high level of information very quickly. So much appreciated. Thank you for being here. All righty, from there, going back to my agenda. Oh, I know what we're doing next. I don't even have to look at my agenda. Mary McCoy, Director of Finance, is here to give us the update on the audit. And we also, we have the whole team here. Stephanie Woodruff and Ricky, tell me how you pronounce your last name. Wait, you're on mute. Bejarano. All right, perfect. Wasn't sure if it was more of a B or a V, but terrific. So Mary, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to share the screen with you all tonight. We do have an update. As we've reported previously, fund balance and net position are 100% complete. What we have on queue for looking forward to from FY21 into FY22 is after March 31st, when we submit the trial balance to our auditors for FY21, we will then begin the review of fund balance and net position for FY22. And that's going to be a theme in our presentation this week and next week throughout each of these areas. As we're wrapping up something for fiscal year 21, we will then move on to fiscal year 22. We're very grateful to the governing body for approving a budget adjustment during the last council committee cycle a few weeks ago that did allocate additional funding for the continuation of these services, the accounting services that we have contracted for through the end of this fiscal year, so through June 30th. On your agenda this evening, you have a few of those contracts that are now amending the original contracts that we had with some of our CPA partners. Very similarly with interfunds, it's 100% complete, has been, but as of the end of this month, moving into the spring, we will be beginning our analysis and our review of fiscal year 22 data for interfunds. We can say the same thing with capital assets as well. This has been 100% complete for a few weeks now, but the review will begin in April. If those contracts are approved by the governing body in the next few weeks, that review will begin in April as well. CFA, we have very good news to share that last week we did submit on March 16th the schedule of expenditures of federal awards to our auditors. We've had the first meeting with the CLA team to share the CFA with them, and we have already begun the audit on that on our federal awards. We've determined what the major programs are, and we have Ricky and his team have begun to provide information to the auditors as they start their review of our federal awards. The last three areas, deferred inflows and outflows, this is 99% complete. We do expect that to complete this week, to take this to 100% complete. And again, with this, as soon as we finish the final quality control review and sign off of this area, we will then move on in April to FY22. Same with liabilities. We are up to 91% complete. We expect this to be complete by the end of the week. Once that final quality control and review is completed, we will move on to FY22 items. Same with our assets. We are in the midst, we're about 90% complete with reconciliations of our two major cash accounts. We will continue to do the final quality control review and post these entries into the general ledger in Munis, which is the official system of record. And then after that is complete and we've submitted the trial balance on the 31st to our auditors, we will begin this review for FY22. So just a recap of where we're at, we're rounding out the March work that we had set out to do earlier and report on every week. We have already started the audit of the federal awards, and we will begin the audit at the beginning of April with CLA of the rest of the financials. And we are targeting the end of June to be completed and submit the audit to the state auditor's office. So with that recap, we are winding down our audit preparation portion for FY21 to move on in the spring and April through June to the external audit portion. Which is very much a collaborative process. We were reviewing with the mayor and the city manager today the progress that we've made and what the expectations will be for the next few months in terms of us providing any of the documents or any of the information that our auditors are requesting in a timely manner. We've talked about setting the bar pretty high to have a realistic yet achievable turnaround time of 48 hours for our city staff across all departments to be responsive to the auditors to make sure that we are continuing to, in this collaborative process, to keep in mind the timeline that we've set out for us. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions from the committee? Director McCoy, I just, please tell your team thank you for this work. I know it's a big lift. It's super important, and I really appreciate that we're really kind of moving through the to-do list. And it seems like it's happening in a very timely manner, and just want to stress again how important it is, and thank everybody for taking it seriously and being cooperative and helping us get this done, because we just have to do it. So really thank you all for the work, and please thank everybody who's moving along with this.
We will. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, seeing no questions, let's move on to our consent agenda. The first item pulled was Counselor Cassett, item A. Let me just get to that. Which is a request for approval of professional services agreement with Weston Solutions, Inc. in the total amount of $568,652.92, including New Mexico gross receipts to provide engineering design services to CIP project number 899A, Acequia Trail Extension Project. And we have members of our staff from Public Works here tonight. And Councilor Cassett, I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rommella and Regina, for being with us. In general, I was just hoping to get a little bit more information about green infrastructure. I'm really excited to learn more about this and that this is something that we are incorporating into our new trail system. So Rommella, I believe that you would be the individual to provide a bit more information about what this looks like and what this means in terms of sustainability goals and the experience of the trail for our community.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman Cassett. Instead of using gray infrastructure to design this trail, we will use green infrastructure, which is based on principle of protecting and enhancing nature and the natural processes. So, for example, for this project, maybe instead of using asphalt for constructing the trail, maybe we can use a gravel paved system. Or if we use asphalt, we can paint the asphalt with gray emulsion material to increase the solar reflectance index of asphalt, to reduce the heat island effect, and to decrease the water pollution from and increase the stormwater drainage capability of our systems. We can also use vegetation to reduce heat island effect or local heat island effect. So we can plant more grasses and put some mulches. We can promote water harvesting to residential owners. And those are what green infrastructure we are going to use will depend on the design. So at this point in time, we don't know how the engineers will design the trail, but those are some examples that we can use for a Acequia trail.
Wonderful. Thank you for that explanation. And I'm really excited that we are using green infrastructure for this project. And I'm curious, when we do have to do maintenance on some of our other trails or hard surfaces, is it possible to kind of retrofit things in green infrastructure that we've previously done gray infrastructure for to an extent, or does it have to be a new build?
I don't have experience with that yet, but I guess in many of these projects, it's more difficult or more expensive to retrofit something than to build. I don't know. My department director might have an idea that she can share with us.
Thank you so much, Rommella, Madam Chair, and Councilor Cassett. It is true. Generally, you want to build it in the beginning because you'd basically be tearing up and rebuilding the whole trail. But there are some exceptions to that. For instance, you might have noticed that along East Alameda, there's been some green infrastructure stormwater management rocks and going in there to manage the water into the river. There was that area with poor drainage. And one of our local, really great stormwater and sort of landscape architects has designed a new project that's going in there. And then to a small extent, we're going to be doing some work along Cerrillos with DOT, where we're redoing that segment between St. Mike's and St. Francis. And now we're looking at really enhancing the stormwater infrastructure, using some green infrastructure in Asbaugh Park and other kinds of ideas like that. So in some cases, you can go back later and make it better. But certainly the asphalt, you probably want to get that right the first time. And it's really great to try these things that Rommela mentioned on trails, because we're a little hesitant to try them on the road. We want to see their durability, the maintainability. Can you plow them? How do they respond in the snow? And so it's great. We're excited to get a chance. We had actually proposed that the bike trail along at Cerrillos might be permeable, and DOT was just, we didn't have enough experience. And so Rommela will try it on a trail, and then we'll have more confidence going forward to implement it in other places.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thanks for moving forward with looking for where you can put this in and where you can experiment with it. And hopefully we'll be able to provide some data that we can expand it to some other areas. I did also, quick question. We have already applied for federal funding for construction, correct?
Yes.
And when should we hear back about whether or not we've received that funding?
Sometime, I believe sometime in August.
Okay. And then do we have basically a backup funding source identified so that we can stay on track in case the federal funding doesn't come through?
Not at this moment, but we will have enough time, I believe, to apply for other funding if we don't get this, if we don't get funding from TAP or the Transportation Alternative Program.
Okay, wonderful. Well, those are all my questions. And thank you again for experimenting with this and moving forward with, how we try to be a greener city in all aspects. I greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing updates on this project. And I have no further questions. If nobody else does, I'll go ahead and move for approval. Oh, sorry, there are other questions.
All right, we have a motion, a second, and we also have more questions. So, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Rommela, who just disappeared. But thank you for getting this project moving. I don't know if she can hear, maybe. Oh, there you are. I just wanted to thank you for, keeping on top of this and moving it forward. It's important for connectivity from District 3 into many parts of the rest of the trail system. So thank you for that. My only question was, does Weston Solutions have an updated business license? Theirs expired on March 5th. I know that's not too far away, but just wanted to make sure that they're in compliance. Don't want any hiccups when this gets to the governing body.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we submitted updated current business registration. I do not know why it was not included in the packet, but I'll make sure that it's included when it goes to Public Works and then to the governing body.
Thank you. And it's on page 39, but that's the old one, I think. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this item. I don't see any other questions. Going once, going twice. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Signy Lindell.
Yes.
Councilor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion
All right.
approved.
That motion passes. We are on then to item E, also pulled by Councilor Cassett, a request for approval of services agreement in the total amount $391,485.05 including New Mexico GRT for Santa Fe Rail Yard Park Playground rehabilitation and Bonko replacement with Exerplay Inc. via CES. And we have Therese Martinez here, correct? Project Administrator, and Sam Burnett and Regina Wheeler. Wow, the whole team. All right, over to you, Councilor Cassett.
Thank you. You're like hosting a game show today. Thank you all so much for being here. And I did just want to thank you so much for the updates to this park and to the slides in particular. As we all know, I have a child, and every time my child runs up those slides, I get a little bit of a heart attack. So I'm really looking forward to you updating these. I did want to ask a bit about, so it looks like this will be closed from, I think, Therese, you emailed me that there's going to be an update for the timeline. So it'll be May 2022 until June 2023. And can you just give a little bit more information about what part of the park is going to be closed? Because I know with summer coming up, there's a lot that happens at the rail yard. And so people may be concerned about those activities still happening.
Yes. Chairwoman Romero Worth and Councillor Cassett, yes, we are going to be closing just a section of the park and playground area, and that is mainly where the slides are, where the tunnel is, and the climbing wall that's in behind the slides hill. And all of that will be enclosed with fencing. It will only be that area. And then individually, when we replace the Bonko benches with our new concrete precast benches, areas of the pathways will be closed, but the rest of the park will remain open. And that includes the sand lot and the netting and the climb netting. All of those will still remain open. So the other areas will not be affected by this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys really minimizing how much is closed off. And I know in summer that sand play is something that's really very popular. So I'm glad that will still be there. And I know that other Santa Fe parents, I've heard a lot of conversation about this playground and about the slides. And so on behalf of all of them, I want to thank you all as well for your work in getting this replaced and moving this forward. I have no further questions, and I'm happy to move for approval.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, if we could get a roll call, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell,
Yes.
Councillor Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. That item passes. We are now on to item I. Request for the approval of a memorandum of agreement for FY 22 through 26 for Santa Fe Community College scholarships for area veterans and their spouses, children, and grandchildren between the City of Santa Fe Veterans Advisory Board and the Santa Fe Community College Foundation for the total amount of $72,000. We have Julie Sanchez here and Councilor Lindell. I believe you pulled this item.
Correct. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Ms. Sanchez. Just a couple of really quick questions. Has this money in the past, have we been able to, or perhaps not us, but the program itself, have they been able to distribute all the monies? Have we had application and been able to distribute all the monies for this program?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, for this particular program, we have funded it, I believe, for 2 years. And in those 2 years, just about all of the funding has been expended. There's about 7-ish $1,000 that need to be expended in this current fiscal year from previous funding.
Great. And is the money strictly for tuition?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the funding is really made to be flexible. So it would cover tuition first if that's something that has not been paid to the community college. And then secondary would go to books, and then whatever's left over would be allocated directly to the student to pay for whatever expenses they have.
Okay. I sure hope that we can, I looked at some of the qualifiers, and it seems like it's a little complicated for somebody to get the money, and there's a lot of qualification for it. I'm really glad to hear that we've been pretty much able to distribute all the monies. It means the program is working. And I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve. Thank you for being here, Julie.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Do we have other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie, now that the state is really providing free college education for, I guess it would be probably children and grandchildren that would be affected by this, does that mean that more money, well, first, does that include veterans as well, or other people as well under the new program?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, this would cover both the veteran and their children and grandchildren.
All right. So if, again, education is free, probably for those that qualify graduating from high school, then there would be more money than for veterans and spouses, probably, potentially.
So Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, with this particular funding, it's only for veterans, children and grandchildren. And so whatever the college scholarship doesn't cover, this funding would cover whatever other needs exist for those families.
So you said it could also go to books and other potential costs of college. That's correct.
That's correct, Councilor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions from the committee? We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Cassett,
Yes.
Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, we are on to item M. Request for the approval of agreement between Document Solutions and the City of Santa Fe in the total amount of $974,322 paid monthly in the estimated amount of $13,532 a month for managed print services and maintenance for the term of 6 years. We have Manuel Gonzalez here and Councilor Lindell. This is your item.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Mr. Gonzalez. Thank you for being here. I'll be quick with this. I'm just trying to determine, I was a little bit unclear. If you could clarify, this is covered service for all of our printers and all the supplies of our printers?
Madam Chair, Councilor Liddell, this covers 125 network printers, scanners, and copiers, and it covers all consumables, which is toner and rollers.
Okay, so it doesn't cover paper or that kind of thing?
No, it does not cover paper. No, ma'am.
Okay, but it does cover, what else does it cover for us? Like
So
that many copiers?
All printers on the network, scanners, and copiers. It covers all service calls, which means paper jams. Our previous maintenance agreement did not cover paper jams, did not cover toner or rollers. When a roller needs to be replaced, they're charging us for rollers.
So do we use like $13,000 worth of toner and rollers every month? I
Madam
mean,
Chair,
it seems like the truth of the matter is some of us, I know Councilor Villarreal certainly remembers that we would on occasion in the past have packets that were, no lie, several thousand pages. They were ridiculously huge, and going to electronic, I think has made everybody feel pretty good. I'm just wondering, are we continuing to decrease and decrease and decrease the amount of printing that we're doing?
Madam Chair, Councilor Liddell, IT's goal is to downsize the city's fleet. Unfortunately, we cannot do that because the data usage numbers are pre-COVID. Now that we're returning back into the workforce, people are coming back on site. We're going to look at usage and then determine. I know we could downsize, but I can't make that call until we have accurate data on usage. And being in COVID, remote work, we don't have that data right now.
So this is a 6-year contract. Should we be doing 6 years?
So within this contract, it covers any new printers we bring on or any printers we downsize to. I know, and I've mentioned this to the mayor and the city manager, we have large printers that could be doing the work of small printers. We're using dump trucks for a wheelbarrow can do, but we really can't get that data until we get back into normal in work, on site, and then we could pull that data. So yes, we do know we could downsize, we want to downsize, but we can't really get that data till we're back on site.
So do we have to be committed for 6 years?
The 6 years was the best agreement we could negotiate with this vendor. For 6 years, we're able to get the consumables, all service calls, but we could always amend the contract, change the term, change the amount of equipment on this contract.
Okay, that's really what I'm trying to get to, is that if we start using a lot less, we can maybe start paying some less.
Yes. Madam
Okay.
Chair, Councilor Dale, that's our goal, is to downsize the fleet once we get accurate data.
Well, I can guarantee you that we've massively downsized. Like I said, I'm sorry, Councilor Rivera, I know that you're familiar with that also. I didn't mean to leave you out with that. So I'll make a motion to approve. I don't want to hurt your feelings, Counselor.
We're all good.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell.
Sure.
Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Rivera.
Yes, and thank you, Councilor Lindell. You made me feel as young as Councilor Cassett for a little bit there.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Great.
All right.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more item, item N. Request for approval of amendment number 1 to contract number 3203041 with Jaramillo Accounting Group to increase compensation from $216,875 to $307,014, including New Mexico gross receipts. We have Ricky Bejarano with us on this item.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bejarano, I just wanted a little exclamation of, is this increase due to increasing the longevity of the contract? increasing the workload of it. Just give us a super brief exclamation of what this increase covers and why we needed it.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell. This is the answer to both your questions is yes. It'll extend the contract period to get us to June 30th. And also it will increase the scope of work in order for us to continue working beyond March 31st. The reason for that is both if there are any loose ends on the fiscal year 21 audit, then we can cover those and we have enough support to cover those. In addition to that, we want them to continue working on 22 so that we can file 22 on time.
Great. The only thing that, the only comment I would make on it after looking through the rates is let's not have them doing overtime and holiday work. That $400 and some an hour figure is staggering. So let's tell them to be sure to take off weekends and holidays and maybe whatever it takes, but those are staggering numbers. But
if I may, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, when you're having been in public accounting, and one of the reasons I'm no longer in public accounting is you work and work and work. There is no overtime, whether it's weekends, holidays, and whatnot. The best you can hope for is that potentially there'd be a bonus on the back end, but those are rare and far between. So we are watching time. We are questioning time. We make them submit, we make all contractors submit detailed reports. We don't tolerate just a statement that as of March, this is the amount you owe. We go back and ask those questions over and over again. And they also currently what's been set up is a spreadsheet that shows the work that they've actually been doing, which accounts they've been working on, and what processes they've had to go through to justify the fees.
well, I really appreciate it, and I will make a motion to approve.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second, and Councilwoman Villarreal, you also pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I guess the questions are for Mr. Bejarano. I like your jacket, by the way, very snazzy.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman, thank you very much.
I wish I could see the full piece, but we only get, our Zoom square. So I just had a question. My questions pertain to all 4 contracts really, for close end and audit preparation. So I guess my question is why all of them went up. I mean, did we not anticipate the amount of work that we thought they would do for us initially when we first set the contracts in place? And this is not just for Jaramillo, but it's for all of the 4 that are on our agenda tonight.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a very good question. And the answer is yes, there are some items that we weren't anticipating, as there always are with this type of work. It's both cleanup work and catch-up work. The other thing is we want, because these 4 contractors are experienced in what they've been doing for 21, we want them to roll into 22. Because at this point in time, we're actually a little behind on 22 and getting prepared for that. The year ends 6/30/22. We've been extremely, in fact, almost 100% focused on 21. And as soon as that's done, then there's catch up to be done for 22. And our commitment, the mayor, the city manager, and Director McCoy have made it very clear that a fiscal year 22 audit will be on time. So this is what it's going to take.
Okay. And so does staff anticipate this being the last increase for fiscal year 22 in terms of these contract amounts?
Not for 22, for 21, yes. The 22 audit essentially starts July 1, and then we'll have to reevaluate at that point to see what help is necessary.
So when we're going into the next fiscal cycle, in terms of budgeting, you all are budgeting funding to continue these contracts into into the next fiscal year?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes.
Okay, so the other question it's hard to figure out what everyone is doing because most of the scope of work for each of these contractors is almost identical. So it's helpful for me to know what they're doing differently than the other person, the other contractor.
Madam
It's
Chair,
basically a cut and paste that you all did in the contract for their scope of work, with the exception of some few changes, but.
Madam Chair,
Chair.
Counselor, I can go ahead and speak to the question about cut and paste. So we did do an RFP in the fall and we did a multi-award RFP where we did select these vendors. So I think it's really important to understand that, their origin was based off of the same scope of work that was included in that RFP. And then Mr. Bejarano, if you can speak to the work that has been done or will be done by these contractors.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal. The scope of work was written broad intentionally because there are so many moving parts to the overall catch up and cleanup. We have everything from cash itself to fixed assets that have to be accounted for. We have the federal programs. Within the federal programs, what complicates the issue this year is the COVID funding. So the contracts were written in such a way that we can assign whoever's done with this piece can go on to the next piece or help another firm with the other piece. So they're intentionally broad, but we do, as I mentioned before, when they bill, we know exactly what they've done and what part of the balance sheet or the income statement they've been working on.
That's good to know. And that actually leads to my other question about coordination between the contractors. Are they communicating with each other? Is there I don't know if that's what Stephanie does, if she's the coordinator for all of the
Madam
four
Chair,
major contractors?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, that's exactly it. We have Ms. Woodruff coordinating contractors. I'm more on the city employee side, but we also have REDW has essentially become the lead contractor. So everything's uploaded into their system called SureLink, and all four contractors load into the same place. So we're not having duplicative work, and we're not having contractors trip over each other. That's essentially Ms. Woodruff's role, to coordinate and ensure that doesn't happen. And it's not happening. We're very careful. We also, 5 o'clock every day, Ms. Woodruff and I touch base to find out who's doing what if we've had discussions with the various contractors. What did they discuss with you? What did you hear from this one? What did you hear from that one? And it is a very coordinated effort. And again, we're watching those hours very closely.
Great, good to hear. And then last, I was curious if these contractors are filling the gap for what are our current staff vacancies. And if that's the case, is there a plan then for the contractors that we'd eventually phase them out so that we actually can have staff doing the job of what the contractors are currently doing?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that is exactly what we're working toward. There is such a paucity, however, of accountants right now. I just mentioned to someone, or to the mayor and the city manager this morning, that in almost 44 years, I've never seen it this bad to try to hire accountants. They're either at Los Alamos, Kirtland, Sandia. They have very attractive, very, very attractive offers. If they're good at what they do, they're at one of those locations. So the paucity is as intense as I've ever seen. And I'm an old man now, so I've seen it come and go. The last time I saw it this bad was in the mid-'80s. For whatever reason, we just couldn't find accountants. So it worked to my benefit because I was one of the accountants available. But there is a high paucity. We're examining what we could possibly do in today's environment and today's economy to encourage people either into the accounting field, and especially with us through internships or even temp services, trying to bring people into the profession. I've asked colleagues, do you know of anybody looking? One very flatly told me no, and if I did, I sure wouldn't tell you. I'd be scooping them up myself. So that's how intense it is in government right now. We're competing with the state of New Mexico, with all the labs, with Sandia, Kirtland, Los Alamos, and the colleges.
Thanks for explaining that scenario. I keep thinking about folks that have retired and want to maybe come back into the workforce, but yeah, I'm not sure.
If I may, Madam Chair and Councilor Villarreal, most of our retirees in accounting are from para origin or entities that are para. And if they come to work for us, they must suspend their para and work straight out with no benefit or no additional augmentation of the retirement. When I was at Northern New Mexico College, it was a field day for me because I was hiring them because Northern is ERB. So they could work, not pay ERB, and continue their para-retirement. And it was great. I was able to fill those. I think I filled about 6 slots with retirees. It was fantastic. It's difficult in our case because most of our retirees in the area, especially in accounting, are para-retirees. So generally, we tend to hire them as contractors. And so that it continues that hamster wheel, I guess.
Thanks for explaining the nuances to us. There's more to it than that. So thank you so much, Mr. Bejarano. And those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have other questions from the committee? We do not see any. If we can get a roll call, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell.
Yes.
Councilor Rivera.
Yes.
Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Terrific. All right, I believe that, I just kicked myself out of my agenda. Hold on. That ends the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, we have matters from staff, matters from the committee, and matters from the chair next.
All right, I'm with you. All right, so we have no action items, matters from staff. That would be you.
Just a brief update on our January GRT. January GRT came in last week in the middle of the month, and we have received from the Taxation and Revenue Department 9.9 million, which is 1.7 million over the FY21 January GRT distribution, and close to what we earned in the prior year. So we are very much on track to continue our positive GRT growth, which we will be documenting as we do every month in a detailed memo highlighting the different industries. We're continuing to see the trends that we've seen in the past. We're seeing a rebound in retail, which we're largely attributing to closing of the loophole for the internet sales tax that was done. And this is the first year we're seeing of that. So as Dr. White mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, gross receipts tax this year is set to reach about 130 million. Prior to COVID hitting in fiscal year 20, we were on pace to hit about 120 million in GRT, but we didn't quite reach that level because of the last 3 months and receipts in the last 3 months of the fiscal year that year. So growth is rebounding, but again, keep in mind the presentation that we had earlier with the various factors, labor market related, inflation related as well. So Dr. White will be documenting much of his presentation earlier into a chapter, revenue chapter for our budget book that really does discuss pretty much what he reviewed with us in 20 minutes, but it'll be much more fleshed out for your review ahead of the April budget hearings. With that, Madam Chair, we'll stand for any questions or we can move on to the next item.
Great. I don't see anybody with, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Just a quick question. Do you anticipate us getting our budget books? And are they going to be electronic or hard copy or both?
Madam Chair, Councilor, we do anticipate you receiving the budget books the first week of April, and we can provide them electronically, and we can, this is an expense that we've saved. I know there was a discussion on printing earlier and not printing these documents in the past 2 years. So if you would like them to be printed, we can take those requests on an individual basis. If you can just email me if you'd like a hard copy of the book.
Thank you.
Of course.
That's all I have.
Okay, matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. Councilor Rivera, did you have something?
Yeah, it was just, I guess depending on what the city manager recommends, are we still planning on budget sessions being Zoom sessions, or are we planning for live sessions?
I don't know that we've had that conversation yet, but I do have the same question. So we should circle the wagons and get back.
Yeah, because it'll take a little more planning if we're doing them live than if we're doing them Zoom. So the sooner we know, Ms. McCoy, the better for me anyway.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera will get you an answer to that question.
Thank you.
Matters from the chair. Besides our next meeting being Monday, April 4th, I did want to just take a moment, and Director McCoy, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I do want to just take a minute and thank the staff in your department for putting together the budget adjustment requests. And maybe you could just take a moment to call out those people who were involved in that. And I just want to take a moment to flag that's a lot of work, and it goes on behind the scenes. And I don't know that the public and even the members of the governing body recognize what you all put into that. And it was well done, and we were able to get more money out. And I just wondered if you'd take a moment to recognize the people who are involved with that.
Madam Chair, I would be happy to do that. Our budget team did work simultaneously on these FY22 budgets, as well as their work that they've been doing on the FY23 budget in preparation for the recommendations and the hearings in April. So it really was an additional task to move this over $11 million at this point in the fiscal year. But we thought it was especially prudent given what we expect where we expect GRT to land, and the fact that we still had about 4 months in the fiscal year left where we could mobilize these dollars. As Dr. White indicated before, we're still having challenges with supply chain shortages and issues. So getting the money out, particularly to order the hybrid police vehicles, for example, will help us lower our fuel costs with fuel prices being so high currently, but also be able to just get a head start on placing those orders ahead of the July 1st fiscal year. So we really appreciate the council. We have joining us tonight a few members of that team. Our budget officer, Andy Hopkins, is joining us tonight, and he led the team that put forward that effort, as did Alexis Lotero, who's also joining us tonight. We also had Lawrence Lovato assisting us with this budget, with this massive budget adjustment that we brought through. And then on the revenue side, we had both Dr. White and Bradley Flitch assisting us as in monitoring all of the different months, GRT throughout the months and the trends. So we'd feel comfortable at this point bringing forward that sizable level of gross receipts. And this is, again, all of this detailed work is going on simultaneous, as out of cycle and going on simultaneous to the really detailed work this team is putting forward to continue to approve personnel requests and monitor our budget on a monthly basis in the current year, but also to plan for the next fiscal year. So really big thank you to all those team members.
Yeah, and I think just another point, which is to get that money out in good time prior to the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, also very important. And so the timing, with how we know that we have the money to spend, then all the work that's required to get them together, then move it through our process, which takes, I don't know, at least a month, and get it approved so that the departments can actually move on it and get that money out the door. So I just wanted to take a moment to flag thanks to your staff and your team, and also to the council for slogging through and approving that money. So thank you. I don't think there's anything else. So we will see you all at the next stop, and we are adjourned.